She said she'd call me that night, but that call never came. Manny, Rachel Barber's boyfriend, there are names that when spoken seem to tighten the hearts of an entire nation. For Australia, that name is Rachel Barber, a 15-year-old girl with a stage dream, an extraordinary talent, and a future bursting with light. Until it was all stolen by someone no one ever suspected, her former babysitter. This was not just a disappearance, not just a heartbreaking death. This was a story of jealous obsession, a meticulously planned scheme, and an identity stolen. In 1999, Rachel Barber was living every teenage dream in Melbourne, Australia. She was an official student at the Dance Factory, one of the country's most prestigious dance academies. With her slender frame, striking features, long flowing hair, and radiant eyes, Rachel looked like someone born to be a star. Even as a child, Rachel was different. She had no interest in math, literature, or science. She had one love only: dance. Her parents, Michael and Elizabeth, didn't suppress that dream. They even tore up the carpet in the living room and laid down hardwood floors, just so their daughter could practice anytime she wanted. At 15, she was closer than ever to reaching the peak of her dreams. But then a mysterious promise, an unknown meeting, and everything came to a stop. March 1st, 1999 began like any other day. Rachel was dropped off by her father at the tram station at 9:30 a.m. She hugged him, smiled, and wished him a good day. No one knew it would be the last time Michael Barber saw his daughter alive. Rachel then met her boyfriend, Manny, and a few friends on her way to school. During the chat, Rachel mentioned something that caught Manny's attention. "I'm going to make a lot of money tonight." She refused to explain further, only saying it was a secret job introduced by an old friend. Manny pressed for details. Rachel reassured him, "It's okay, it's not dangerous, I even get to keep some clothes." That made Manny even more uneasy. Clearly, this wasn't just a part-time gig. But Rachel kept everything to herself. She even stopped by a store and placed a deposit on a pair of blue ballet shoes she'd always dreamed of, promising she'd come back the next day to pay the rest when she had the money. By the end of the day, around 5:35 p.m., Rachel and Manny parted ways at school. She hugged him, told him she loved him, and walked toward another tram line, saying she had to meet a friend. She told him she'd call that night, but the phone never rang. The Barber family lived with structure and routine. Michael always picked Rachel up at 6:15 p.m. sharp from the tram stop. Dinner was always on time. But that evening, 6:15 came and went, no sign of Rachel. Elizabeth began to worry. By 7:40 p.m., Michael called home, "I don't see her, she's not at the stop." Elizabeth immediately contacted the police. But instead of launching a search, they replied coldly, "She's probably just a runaway teen, she'll come home soon." But Michael and Elizabeth knew their daughter. Rachel was afraid of the dark. She had once been followed by a strange man. She told her parents everything, she never kept secrets. But this time, she hadn't told them about the job tonight. And that terrified them. With no help from police, the Barbers printed flyers, knocked on doors, asked everyone they could. They discovered one small clue. Rachel had placed a deposit on a pair of blue dance shoes, but never came back to get them. At the store, a staff member revealed something chilling. A strange man had once come in, recruiting young girls for a legal brothel in Fitzroy. Elizabeth trembled. They called the place directly and breathed a sigh of relief when they learned Rachel had never worked there. But Rachel was still missing, and the police were still doing nothing. On the third day after her disappearance, the local community had had enough. They organized a large-scale search, dividing up areas, handing out flyers. Finally, maybe out of shame, the police were forced to join the search. Then, on March 4th, a breakthrough. Allison, an old family friend, called, "I just heard Rachel's missing, but I saw her that day, on a tram with another girl." She described the place Rachel got off, the corner of High Street and Williams Road. Police checked the security footage. And yes, there was Rachel, captured on camera walking with a woman. From that moment on, the case began to shift. Investigators combed through Rachel's list of old acquaintances. One name stood out: Caroline Reed Robertson, a former babysitter who hadn't been in touch for years. But oddly enough, Caroline had called the Barber family after Rachel went missing, casually asking about her in a strangely emotionless tone. Police checked phone records. Caroline had called twice on February 28th, just one day before Rachel disappeared. She also lived near the tram stop where Rachel was last seen, and she had taken off work on March 1st, claiming she was sick. But that wasn't all. Neighbors later told police they had heard loud, gut-wrenching sobbing coming from Caroline's apartment that night. It sounded like a child wailing, one neighbor recalled. At this point, it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was the chilling outline of a truth about to emerge. I remember that crying, like a little girl screaming, but then it just stopped. Caroline's neighbors. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Caroline Reed Robertson, once the trustworthy babysitter of the Barber family, was no longer the same person they had known. Suspicious phone calls. A conveniently located apartment. A sick day that lined up perfectly with Rachel's disappearance. Piece by piece, a haunting image began to take shape, and at the center of it all was Caroline, who had seemingly vanished along with Rachel. Police went to Caroline's apartment in Richmond, but no one answered the door. Later that day, they returned. They knocked loudly again and again, still nothing. Sensing something wasn't right, police made the call break the lock. The apartment was a mess, clothes strewn everywhere. But what startled the officers wasn't the clutter, it was Caroline herself lying face down on the floor, completely unresponsive. At first they thought she was dead. But no, she had a weak pulse. Caroline was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. While doctors fought to stabilize her, detectives searched the apartment, and what they found was even more disturbing than a lifeless body. In one large bag, they discovered clothes all size 8. Rachel's size, not Caroline's, but that was just the beginning. The entire apartment was littered with notebooks, dozens of them, filled cover to cover. And when police began to read, it was like entering the mind of someone delusional, obsessed, and deeply disturbed. Every page was about Rachel Barber, her name repeated over and over again. Notes about her habits, interests, body type, clothing, walk, eyes, voice, and worst of all, a step-by-step plan. One, lure Rachel to the apartment with a fake, easy job, good pay. 2, make sure she doesn't tell anyone, not even her boyfriend. 3, feed her drugged pizza. 4, strangle her. 5, hide the body. 6, change identity. 7, become Rachel. Oh yes, Caroline didn't just want to kill Rachel. She wanted to become her. Among the documents, police found a completed legal form to change her name. The new name, Rachel Barber. Caroline had even planned to move to Byron Bay, a place where no one knew her. Even more terrifying, she wrote that she intended to undergo cosmetic surgery to make her face look like Rachel's. It was the blueprint of a broken mind. And for the first time, detectives understood this wasn't a spontaneous crime. It had been planned for a very, very long time. At the hospital, Caroline regained consciousness. She had suffered a major seizure, the cause of her collapse. Detectives wasted no time. They began the interrogation. And shockingly, Caroline confessed immediately. When asked where Rachel was, she responded coldly, "She's dead." Officers were stunned. They remembered a moving company worker saying that Caroline had requested transport for a statue wrapped in a large cloth bag to her father's rural property in Kilmore. The very next day, police arrived at the remote farmland near a small creek. And there, in the damp earth, they found the body of Rachel Barber curled up, a cord still wrapped tightly around her neck. She was already decomposing. But the ligature was still in place. The beautiful 15-year-old who had hugged her boyfriend and promised to call that night. now lay lifeless in a filthy cloth bag buried in the mud. Murdered by the very woman who once cared for her as a child. As soon as she was physically able, Caroline was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. In court, her defense argued that Caroline suffered from mental illness, that she had grown up in a loveless household and had been under intense pressure from her mother. But the prosecution pushed back hard. Those journals, the detailed planning, her calculated actions before and after the crime, all of it showed this was no sudden psychotic break. It was a carefully scripted, long premeditated crime. Caroline wasn't insane. She knew exactly what she was doing step by step, line by line. The court sentenced her to 20 years in prison, but for the Barber family, 20 years would never be enough. A young life had been stolen, and the killer would only serve a few decades behind bars. In August 2013, after serving just 14 years, Caroline was up for parole. A wave of public outrage erupted. Rachel's mother, Elizabeth, led the campaign to block her release, calling Caroline a manipulator capable of playing the victim just to fool the parole board. The protest worked for a while, but not for long. In January 2015, Caroline applied again. This time she was granted parole. She walked out of prison with a completely transformed appearance, blonde hair, thin frame, and a face that eerily resembled Rachel Barber. Rachel's grieving mother spoke through tears. "She looks like my daughter, and that chills me to the bone." Caroline Reed Robertson, the woman who had once drawn up a murder plan as if it were a twisted stage script, was now free, walking among the public. With golden hair, a slim figure, and a face that mirrored her victim's. Caroline now lives somewhere in society, beginning a new life. While the Barber family has no new life to begin, Rachel Barber, a girl just 15 years old, wasn't just murdered. Her identity was hijacked. Her dreams, her face, her very existence was consumed by someone who once knew her and became obsessed. After the trial, Rachel's parents had to learn to live with the silence. No more footsteps dancing through the house. No more music playing every afternoon. Only an empty room and hundreds of photos with no more to come. In a post-trial interview, Elizabeth said, "I'm not angry, I'm not seeking revenge. But I can't accept that my daughter was murdered by someone who once cared for her, and then only spends a few years in jail." The case of Rachel Barber became a national headline across Australia, not just because of the horrifying nature of the crime, but because of the public outrage toward the legal system. People everywhere began to ask, how could a murderer serve just 15 years? Why didn't the police act sooner? And could Rachel have been saved if someone had seen the warning signs? In the years following her death, Rachel was posthumously honored. A book titled Perfect Victim was published, detailing the case and exploring the twisted psychology of Caroline. The book was later adapted into a 2009 television film called In Her Skin, starring Guy Pearce and Miranda Otto as Rachel's parents. Rachel's story no longer lived just in court records. It became a wake-up call. When Caroline was released in 2015 under strict supervision and conditions, the public was uneasy. Many feared she had never truly abandoned her fantasy of becoming Rachel, that the obsession still lingered, waiting to rise again. And then came a chilling revelation. After prison, Caroline began dating a former convict, a man previously jailed for armed robbery. The two were planning to move in together. Public outrage exploded. Rachel's family lived in fear. "She lives just across the city," Elizabeth whispered. "I could run into that face any day on the street." But Michael and Elizabeth Barber didn't fade quietly into grief. They became advocates for legal reform, fighting for harsher sentencing in cases of premeditated murder, especially those involving psychological manipulation. They also pushed for youth education, teaching teens how to recognize signs of grooming and manipulation, and the importance of speaking up when they feel unsafe. If we couldn't save our own daughter, Michael said, maybe we can help save someone else's. More than 25 years have passed since Rachel Barber vanished, but the memory of her, a passionate,